Welcome to the program, and thanks for joining me. I'm Alex Rondinan, and this is If History is Any Guide, the political and current affairs program on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. In this episode, I will be talking about Ben Carson and his recent comments about wealth, poverty, and that certain state of mind that will either make someone rich or poor. So stick around. Ben Carson, retired neurosurgeon and former presidential candidate for the Republican Party in 2016, is the current Housing and Urban Development Secretary under the Trump administration. Throughout his political career, Carson has tended to take positions and make statements that will parrot, legitimize and reinforce the traditional conservative Republican viewpoints on the world, especially on the race and poverty questions. For example, during his presidential run, he recalled his years at university in the 1970s, depicting the Black Power movement as a violent, angry mob which sought nothing but to roam the campuses and assault innocent white bystanders. This made the Black Panthers essentially the black version of the Ku Klux Klan, who wanted nothing but violent racial power. All this perfectly conformed with all the old racist stereotypes of that movement from the day, which came out of the ruling conservative and liberal establishments. With this same agenda at hand, on two separate occasions, Carson has made comments which appear to downplay the intensity and severity of injustice and history-shifting uniqueness and importance of New World slavery. He said that Obamacare was the worst thing to happen to America since slavery, and argued that government-run healthcare was really like slavery. And then on another occasion, he referred to the New World slaves as illegal immigrants, thereby focusing attention on the continental transportation of human beings, while ignoring the kidnapping, murder, torture, rape, and unpaid labor that came with the phenomenon. Since taking the job as head of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Carson has made a series of public statements regarding the nature of poverty and race in America. As per to form, these have all tended towards reiterating the old right-wing notion that present-day African-American poverty and oppression is caused by their own cultural inadequacies and their unwillingness to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, rather than structural mechanisms within the system which make it difficult for them to even keep their heads above water, let alone create a decent and comfortable life for themselves. In all honesty, there isn't actually anything that Ben Carson says that's unique, informative, or out of the ordinary. It's not as if he's providing us with new insights or fresh data that has the potential to shift the terms of the discussion on race and poverty in the US. He isn't approaching this from a new point of view, and he doesn't try to change the terms of the conversation. Instead, Carson pretty much just repeats what hundreds of other conservative politicians and journalists have said over the past 40 years, playing on all the old, stale, long-debunked, used ad nauseum tropes and stereotypes. This means that the actual substance of what he's trying to say isn't actually new or interesting or remarkable or game-changing. If it wasn't for the fact that he is a member of the United States Executive Cabinet, no one would pay any attention to what he was saying, and he would have long since disappeared into the ether of American conservative loudmouth echo chamber. Last Wednesday, Ben Carson was interviewed by Armstrong Williams of SiriusXM Radio, which included him making the following remark.
I think poverty to a large extent is also a state of mind. You take somebody who has the right mindset, you can take everything from them and put them on the street, and I guarantee you in a little while they'll be right back up there. And you take somebody with the wrong mindset, you can give them everything in the world. They'll work their way back down to the bottom.
So, to repeat what Carson just said, If you place someone with the wrong frame of mind in a position of wealth and prosperity, they'd likely lose it all within a matter of time and regress back to their original position of poverty and destitution. While if you place someone in the right frame of mind in a position of misery and depravity, they were more likely to quickly rebuild their lives and climb back up the ladder to a position of prominence, security, and high stature. Now, on a prima facie analysis, Ben Carson's statement is utterly meaningless and worthless. Firstly, he describes frame of mind in such an absurd and abstract way that it cannot be materially reckoned with or quantified, making it scientifically incalculable. It might be touching on something truthful or might be completely wrong, but since there's nothing concrete to the description, there's no actual way of testing it for its truthfulness. Secondly, he's talking about a hypothetical situation without reference or metaphor or allegory to a real-life scenario or event, which means there's no way of going into the real world and seeing if what he's arguing can actually have meaningful social implications. It's so abstract and utopian and immaterial that it's difficult to see what real-life consequences it could ever have, even under the best of scientific conditions. It seems to me that the most useful and profitable thing we could do in this situation is just dismiss the statement as typical politician rhetorical gibberish. Secondly, in his own clumsy and incoherent way, Carson seems to be playing his usual role of reinforcing and defending traditional conservative Republican views on race and poverty. As inequality, unemployment, homelessness, and general poverty continues to increase across the United States, the calls for comprehensive change to policy on these issues have been growing louder and louder. The rise of left-wing politicians like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are emblematic of the fact that millions of Americans have abandoned their willingness to accept neoliberalism and are looking for an alternative way of organizing society. 40 years of neoliberalism have not offered up new opportunities for wealth, expansion, development, and transformation, much as the cheerleaders of Reaganism for so long claim. Reducing regulations and taxes on the wealthy didn't unleash a new economic boom which triggered the emergence of new industries, new jobs, and new prosperity for all, as the claimants of trickle-down economics would have you believe. Instead, there are tens of millions of surplus people across the country who play no meaningful role in the country because they have nothing to offer the system, and so get closed off from access to services or the opportunity to prove themselves. Wealth continues to be concentrated into fewer and fewer hands, and most capital gets spent on non-productive areas of the economy like finance, insurance, and luxury technologies which don't have flow-on effects to the rest of the economy. The entire American economy appears structured in such a way as to guarantee that there will be increases in both the numbers of rich and poor. Meanwhile, Ben Carson is there ready to depict poverty as a cultural and psychological rather than political and economic phenomenon, and so the reason why working class, precariat, and poor people cannot rise up to a higher level of wealth and prosperity is because they don't have the right ideas, thinking processes, or hard work ethic. Victim blaming is a standard trope of conservative republicanism, and Ben Carson is there to solemnly repeat those sacred truisms. For the sake of argument, let's just concede Ben Carson's most concrete and verifiable point, which is that if you took all the money away from a wealthy person, then they'd very quickly get back on their feet, climb their way back up, and replenish themselves to a state of fortune. And if you gave a poor person lots of money, they'd soon lose it or misuse it and sink back down into their original state of misery and deficiency. For the sake of playing along, let's just assume that this is true and not question its flawed reasoning. And as we do this, we need to find explanations for why this would occur without doing what Ben Carson does, which is appealing to a mechanism which he calls a certain mindset that cannot be identified, verified, quantified, or tested. Carson does the unscientific thing of pointing to a set of data and just assuming that he knows what caused it without actually ever demonstrating so, or even explicitly offering up an explanation that might be considered a working hypothesis. We need to do the scientific thing, which is to look at this hypothetical phenomenon, which is that even if you flip the classes around, they'd soon return back to their original states, and offer up some kind of sociological scientific reason as to why that would occur. Capitalism, of course, is not this clean and pure free market, which allows good ideas to rise to the top and bad ideas to sink to the bottom. It's never been a meritocratic system, nor has it ever genuinely tried to be, and it's only right-wing ideologues who fanatically profess it to be the case. This notion that hard work, clean living, and keeping yourself out of trouble are the surefire steps to accumulating wealth are simply myths that originate out of America's colonial days. We need to study and appreciate how American capitalism actually works. In order to become a successful and profitable business person, rich people have to learn the tricks of the trade. After all, capitalism is a complicated network of laws, bureaucratic channels, hierarchies of authority, contracts between businesses and the government, juridical and political agendas. To a very large extent, getting jobs and positions and contracts and market share is not about what you know, but who you know, which means that networking and building up contacts and knowing people in the right places and using bribes to oil the wheels of bureaucracy is more important than building up experience or skills, let alone employing hard work and determination and a clean lifestyle. The most successful businesses are generally not the ones who produce the best products or offer the best services, but the ones that are best able to manipulate the tax code to minimize the amount of tax they have to pay, best able to bribe the politicians and cops to make sure that the law doesn't get in their way, and best able to make connections with people in high places so that they can call on favors when needed. When the Panama Papers were leaked to the media a year or so ago, it was uncovered that most of the richest people in the world had accounts in these overseas tax havens. This has nothing to do with their culture or mindset, but knowledge of the tax loopholes and access to highly skilled accountants who have the ability to make their money disappear safely and not leave a trail. I don't hear the Ben Carsons of the world complaining that these rich people don't have that certain mindset in their willingness to lie, cheat and steal in order to keep their money for themselves and not pay taxes on it. So for your average rich person, because they have all these networks and they know all the tricks of the trade, even if they suffered a tragedy and lost their fortune, they would still have the know-how in order to rebuild their lives, create new companies, and start making money again within no time. Assuming that they still have their Rolodex of contacts and still could manipulate the political and juridical and tax systems to their benefit, there's nothing stopping someone from quickly picking up their lives from where they left off and accumulating a new personal fortune. The exact same thing goes for poor and working class people. If they don't know the tricks of the trade, the secret rules that underlie the entire system, how to manipulate things to your advantage that minimize the risk you yourself suffer and maximize your ability to get the best out of every opportunity, they are going to be taken advantage of and manipulated by government and other rich people, and they'll soon find themselves bankrupt and thrown out. To take just two examples, George W. Bush and Donald Trump would have completely failed as businessmen if they hadn't been bailed out. If you don't have access to people in high places and have built up networks within your industry, there's no way you'll be able to create deals and contracts within that industry, which means you'll likely be isolated and shunned by the rest of the rich people there. So Ben Carson could be right. but not for the reasons he thinks. In fact, it's for the reasons that are completely the opposite to what he's trying to suggest. Far from there being some cultural, ontological, psychological, existential characteristic, which he calls a certain mindset, which can differentiate and separate people into social classes, it's actually the organizations, practices, and networks of the capitalist system which makes the rich people rich and the poor people poor. The inequalities of capitalism are perpetuated, maintained, extended, and intensified through the structural, institutional characteristics of the capitalist system, including both the state and the marketplace. It's these which are the source of class divisions in society, rather than cultural or psychological differences between different groups of people. That's all the time we have for today. You've been listening to If History is Any Guide, the political and current affairs program on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm Alex Rondinan. Until next time, goodbye.